Picture a building that smells like it's trying to kill you before you even walk through the door. Now fill it with 40 people who are already halfway there. Add the sound of someone coughing blood into a tin cup somewhere in the dark. Add the smell of vinegar used to clean wounds that weren't clean to begin with. Add the particular human smell of people who haven't been moved in days, lying in shirts that were last washed in February. That's the Manchester Infirmary in 1832. It is simultaneously one of the most important buildings in the city and one of the most terrifying places any poor person in England could find themselves. A place where physicians write papers about the miraculous advances of modern medicine and present them to each other at elegant dinners, while the patients in the wards upstairs eat gruel that a healthy person wouldn't feed their pigs. A place where you could receive the latest surgical technique and die of the infection from the unwashed knife within the week. A place where the doctors carry death on their hands without knowing it, where the nurses drink gin in the supply closet, and where the official record of your treatment will say, nutritious diet, full rest, restorative broth, while what you actually received was a bowl of grey liquid with something floating in it that you couldn't identify and decided correctly not to investigate further. Manchester in 1832 is a city that is making itself up as it goes along. 50 years ago, it was a market town. Now it has 250,000 people and roughly the same number of problems. The cotton mills run 24 hours a day. The smoke from the factories has turned the buildings black. The River Irwell runs colours that rivers are not supposed to run. And this year, 1832, there is something new in the air. Something that arrived in the autumn of 1831 on a ship from Hamburg and has been working its way through the country ever since, taking the poor first, always the poor first, and leaving behind the particular kind of silence that only follows when a street has too many closed doors. Cholera. Everyone in Manchester knows someone who knows someone. The newspapers are calling it an epidemic. The church is calling it God's judgment. The doctors are calling it a disease of the miasma, bad air, rising from filth and sewers and the exhalations of the poor. None of them are entirely right, but the doctors aren't entirely wrong either. It does thrive in filth. It does take hold where the water is shared, and the sewers overflow, and 20 people sleep in one room. And so, the hospitals, and so, you. So get comfortable. This is the story of what happens when the city that built itself on your labour decides it needs to save you. Of what medicine looked like before anyone had thought to wash their hands. Of what care looked like when care was rationed by class, by coin, by whether the person doing the rationing liked the look of you. Here we go. You don't want to go. That's the first thing you need to understand. Nobody goes to the hospital because they want to. Nobody looks at the Manchester Infirmary on Piccadilly and thinks, yes, that's where I'd like to spend my time. You go because you have no other choice. You go because it's the second week of March and you've had the fever for 4 days now, and the woman who lets the room where you sleep, a widow named Mrs. Hartley with a face like a fist and a heart that is, despite everything, not entirely absent, has told you in no uncertain terms that if you die in her house, she won't be held responsible for the consequences, and you've decided that this is the closest thing to kindness she knows how to express. Infirmary, she says, standing in the doorway of your room with her arms folded. She won't come closer. Today, not tomorrow. She's right to be frightened. The whole street is frightened. There have been cases 2 roads over. The Board of Health has been pasting notices on the walls of buildings for months. They say things like, Cleanliness is next to godliness, and report any suspicious illness immediately, and everyone reads them and then goes back to the shared privy that serves 42 people on 3 floors and thinks about God and what he might mean by all this. So you go. You pull on your coat with hands that feel too heavy for your arms. The coat is a good coat, or it was 3 years ago, when you bought it second-hand from a man on Market Street who claimed it had been made for a solicitor's clerk. You don't know if that's true. You know it's the best thing you own, and that wearing it now, when you're sweating through your shirt and your legs feel like they're filled with wet sand, is a kind of optimism, a statement of intent. I am a man who owns a good coat. I intend to still own it next week. You're 23 years old. You work in the carding room of a cotton mill on Great Ancoat Street. You've been in Manchester for 2 years, arriving from a village in Cheshire with a recommendation letter from the vicar and the absolute certainty of a young man who has not yet learned what cities do to certainty. The walk to the infirmary takes 12 minutes in normal times. Today it takes 30. You stop twice. Once at the corner of Lever Street because the world tilts sideways for a moment and you have to put your hand on the wall of a building and wait for it to right itself. The wall is cold under your palm, rough brick. Something about that coldness is the best thing you've felt in 4 days. Once more on Piccadilly, because there's a cart stopped in the road, a horse that's decided it's done for the morning, and the crowd pushing past it jostles you and your legs nearly give. Nobody helps you. That's not a judgment. That's just what cities are. A man leaning against a wall looking pale is a common sight. There are so many reasons a man might lean against a wall looking pale. Hunger, drink, fear, despair at the price of coal, the particular exhaustion that comes from working 14 hours in a room full of cotton dust. Nobody can stop for all of them. You get to the infirmary door. You push it open. The smell hits you like a physical thing. Not a bad smell exactly, not immediately. Your first thought is that it smells like something is being cleaned. Carbolic and something sharper underneath, something acidic that bites at the back of your throat, like vinegar left to go off, like old blood that has been diluted but not quite removed. And then, underneath that, the other smell, the one you don't have a word for but your body recognizes without your brain's permission. The smell of people who are very sick clustered together in a room with inadequate windows. It is the smell of illness, the way the tannery at the edge of Salford smells like leather. Not cleanly, not pleasantly, but with the total commitment of something that has saturated every surface, every beam, every corner and crack and curtain. You stand in the entrance hall and breathe through your mouth. There is a desk. Behind the desk, a man, a clerk, youngish, with ink on his cuff and the particular expression of someone who has processed a great many sick people today and has not found this work spiritually fulfilling. He looks up at you, looks back down at his ledger, looks up again. Name: Thomas Baxter. Age: 23. Occupation: carder, Great Ancoat Street. Parish of settlement? This is the question that matters. This is the question that decides everything. You're only allowed to be treated here, for free, on the charity wards, if you have a proper settlement in Manchester. Which means you have to prove you've lived here long enough, or worked here long enough, or that your master will vouch for you. You give him the name of the overseer at the mill. You give him the name of your lodgings. You give him Mrs. Hartley, who will, if pressed, confirm you exist and pay rent on time and have not yet died in her house. The clerk writes things down. His pen scratches against the ledger in a way that, in your current state, seems unbearably loud. Symptoms: fever, 4 days. My hands, rash, some, on my chest, and my bowels, you answer. It is not a dignified conversation. None of what follows, you will discover, is going to be particularly dignified. Dignity is something that the infirmary takes from you at the door along with your coat. Speaking of which. Coat, the clerk says, extending his hand. I'd rather. It goes in the store, you get a ticket, you get it back when you leave. He says this without looking up. He has said it many times. All personal effects stored. Regulation. You hand over the coat. He hands you a small numbered ticket. The coat disappears through a door behind the desk. The number on the ticket is 847. You stand there in your shirt and braces holding a small piece of paper with 847 on it. In a building that smells of carbolic and old sickness. And you have a fever and your legs feel like wet sand, and somewhere upstairs someone is coughing in a way that sounds like it might never stop. Welcome to the Manchester Infirmary. A nurse comes to collect you. I should tell you something about nurses in 1832, because the word means something different to what you might expect. Florence Nightingale is 12 years old. She's in Florence, which is how she got the name, and she will not arrive at Scutari with her lamp and her mortality statistics, and her radical notion that perhaps hospitals should not kill people faster than the diseases they were admitted with for another 22 years. Right now, in 1832, nursing is not a profession. It is not a vocation. It is not something that requires training, examination, or any particular qualification beyond being female, willing to work for almost nothing, and possessed of a constitution strong enough to spend 12 hours a day in a room full of very sick people without either fainting or drinking yourself unconscious. Many nurses drink themselves partially unconscious instead. This is not cruelty. This is what happens when you pay someone almost nothing to do work that is physically grueling, emotionally devastating, and completely without social recognition. You drink because the alternative is feeling all of it. The nurse who comes for you is named Mrs. Plum. You will not learn her first name. Nurses in hospitals are referred to as Mrs. regardless of marital status. A courtesy title that means nothing because courtesy is not something that applies to women at this level of the hierarchy. She's perhaps 40, perhaps 50. Her face is the face of a woman who has not slept properly in a decade, and her apron, which was once white, is now the colour of things you would rather not think about. She doesn't introduce herself. She just says, "This way," and walks. You follow, up a staircase. The walls on either side are painted white, though the paint is yellowing, and in one place has been patched over what looks like it might have been a very bad stain. The banister is smooth with use. Thousands of hands have gripped this banister. Sick hands, frightened hands. You grip it now. At the top of the stairs, a corridor, and at the end of the corridor, a door. Mrs. Plum opens it, and the full weight of the ward comes out to meet you. The room is longer than you expected, much longer. It runs the full depth of the building, maybe 60 feet. On each side, beds. 20 beds to a side, pushed close to the walls, separated by narrow gaps that are exactly wide enough to squeeze through sideways. Each bed has a thin mattress, a rough wool blanket the colour of dust, and a small wooden cabinet beside it, where a person might theoretically keep their personal effects, though personal effects are downstairs in a store under a number. The ceiling is high. There are windows on both sides, high up, and they are closed. In March, when 40 people are breathing in this room, the windows are closed because the miasma theory says bad air comes in from outside. The doctors believe, with the absolute confidence of men who have never been wrong in their own estimation, that disease is carried in bad air, the smell of decay, the exhalations of sewers, the general atmosphere of poor neighbourhoods. Therefore, keep the windows closed, keep the outside out. What this means in practice is that the air inside the ward is so thick you could almost chew it. 40 people, their breath, their perspiration, their illness, their fear, all of it sealed in a room with inadequate ventilation. The smell is extraordinary. It is so far beyond the smell in the entrance hall that the entrance hall smell now seems, in retrospect, like lavender. This is the distilled essence of human sickness in an enclosed space. It is warm despite the March cold outside. It has weight. It pushes back against you as you walk through the door. You keep walking. What else can you do? Bed 14, Mrs. Plum says, pointing. Change into the hospital shirt. It's on the bed. Leave your clothes folded on the chair. She pauses. Looks at you with an expression that might be assessment and might be something closer to pity, quickly suppressed. You've eaten today? No. Supper's at 6. Don't miss it. She turns to leave, then pauses. Don't ask the other patients about their symptoms. Don't touch anything on the cabinet beside your bed. Don't get up in the night without calling. For the night nurse. What if I need the... There's a pot under the bed. Use it. The night nurse empties them in the morning. And she's gone. Back down the corridor. The door closes behind her with a soft final sound. You stand in the ward and look at bed 14. The man in bed 13 is asleep, or appears to be facing the wall, his shoulders rising and falling with the shallow breath of someone who is very tired, in a way that goes deeper than sleep. The man in bed 15, to your other side, is awake, and he looks at you as you stand there with the expression of a man who has been in this room long enough to have developed opinions about new arrivals, none of them optimistic. He is old, 60 perhaps. His face is the colour of old parchment, and his hands, resting on top of the blanket, are the hands of someone who has spent 40 years doing physical labour. Broad, thick-fingered, calloused to the point where the calluses have calluses. He watches you pick up the hospital shirt from the bed, watches you look at it. It is made of rough linen. Rough in the way that things get rough when they have been washed many times in very hard water and never had anything soft applied to them in their lives. It has a faded brown mark near the hem that was not removed by the washing process, and that you decide firmly not to investigate further. It itches, the old man says. You look at him. The shirt. It itches. Worse in the night. You'll want to keep your own undershirt on underneath if you've got one. You have one. You hadn't thought of it. Thank you, you say. He nods, looks back at the ceiling. You get changed. There are two kinds of patients in the Manchester infirmary. There are the fee-paying patients who have private rooms, or at least are in the smaller wards on the other side of the building. They have visitors who arrive in decent clothes and sit in chairs that have been brought up from somewhere below. They receive broth with actual meat in it. Their doctors spend more than 4 minutes at their bedside. When they need something in the night nurse comes within a reasonable time. And then there are the charity patients, the poor wards. You are in the poor ward. In the poor ward you share a room with 39 other people. In the poor ward the diet is determined not by what a sick person needs to recover, but by what the institution can afford to provide, while still claiming, in their annual report to the philanthropists who fund them, that the diet is generous and restorative. In the poor ward, the medicine is, and this is the thing that will take you the longest to understand, even as it is happening to you, often worse than nothing. Not because the doctors want to harm you. They don't. They are, most of them, men who went into medicine with genuine intentions and a genuine belief that what they are doing is helping. They are wrong, but they don't know that yet. The germ theory of disease won't be fully established for another 30 years. Washing hands before examining patients will not become standard practice until a Hungarian doctor named Semmelweis figures it out in Vienna in 1847, and even then nobody will listen to him for 20 years because he's too angry about it, and nobody likes being told they've been killing people with their own hands. Right now, in 1832, the doctor who will see you tomorrow morning believes the following things: diseases caused by bad air, miasma, and imbalances in the body's humours. The correct treatment for fever is to remove blood from the body, reducing the excess heat. The bowels should be cleared aggressively with purging agents. Opium is useful for almost everything. The poor are generally constitutionally weaker than the wealthy, probably due to their inferior moral character and diet, which means their prognosis is inherently worse. The window should remain closed. These beliefs are going to do things to you over the next several days, but that's tomorrow. Tonight, first, supper. Supper comes at 6 o'clock. The smell of it arrives before it does. You've been lying in bed 14 for 2 hours. You've been lying very still, because movement makes the fever worse, makes the room spin, makes the light through those high closed windows go strange and too bright. You've been listening to the sounds of the ward. The coughing, which is almost constant, layered and overlapping like a terrible kind of music. The muttering of the man 2 beds down, who seems to be having a conversation with someone who isn't there. The squeak of the floor when Mrs. Plum or one of the other nurses walks past. The distant, muffled sound of the street outside filtering up through closed windows. You have been thinking about your mother. You don't want to think about her. It is too far away and too sad in your current state. But illness does this. It reaches back to the earliest things, the warmest, softest things, the hands that knew how to help when you were sick as a child. There are no such hands here. There is the rough linen shirt, the thin mattress, the wool blanket that smells of everyone who has used it before you, and then the smell of supper. It comes through the door when Mrs. Plum opens it to admit a young girl, a kitchen girl, maybe 16, thin and red-faced from the kitchen heat, carrying a large pot with 2 handles. Behind her, another girl with a stack of bowls. Something in you responds to the smell of food. Your body knows it needs something. You haven't eaten in almost 2 days. You try to work out what the smell is. It is not a bad smell, not immediately. It smells vaguely of something cooked, of heat at least. There is a sweetness underneath it, gone slightly off. Something earthy and familiar but wrong in a way you can't quite place. The kitchen girl sets the pot down on the table near the door, begins ladling. The bowls make their way down the ward past hand to hand. Yours arrives. You look at it. The gruel is grey. Not grey the way oatmeal gruel is sometimes grey. That pale, innocuous grey that is the colour of things that are dull but harmless. This is a grey with ambition. A grey that has brown undertones, and if you tilt the bowl, a kind of glistening. There are things in it. Small things, soft, darker than the grey of the gruel itself. You take your spoon. a tin spoon, heavy with a dent in it, and push one of them to the side. It is fibrous, soft in a way that speaks of extended cooking. It might be a piece of turnip. You look more carefully. There are several of these pieces. Each one has, at its edges, a quality of softness that is beyond what cooking alone would produce. A quality that suggests the softness was there before cooking. That the turnip, wherever it came from, was not at its best before it went into the pot. The old man in bed 15, his name you'll learn is Joseph, though he asks you to call him Joe, has already eaten half his bowl. Don't look at it, he says, without looking at you. What is it? Gruel. Don't ask more than that. Is it? Don't. He turns his head to look at you now. His eyes are tired and steady. The eyes of a man who has learned to manage expectations. You're hungry. That's food. Those are two facts that are related to each other in a way that should make the rest not matter. You look at the bowl. He's right. You are hungry. Your hands are shaking slightly. Partly the fever, partly a body that has had nothing since a piece of bread yesterday morning. You eat. The taste is what the smell suggested. Something that was a turnip once, before a series of decisions were made about its future that the turnip would not have endorsed. Cooked down to a texture that is somewhere between thick liquid and soft solid. The grey gruel itself is oat-based, probably, though the oats have been cooked so long they've lost any individual identity they might once have had. It is warm. That is the thing to hold on to. It is warm and it is food, and your body receives it with the desperate gratitude of something that has been waiting. You eat the whole bowl. You try very hard not to think about the edges of the turnip pieces. In the morning the doctors come. You hear them before you see them. The sound of footsteps in the corridor, multiple sets and voices. Educated voices, confident with the confidence of men who are never questioned in their own domain. The ward door opens. Dr. William Cartwright is the senior physician. He is perhaps 50, with grey side whiskers, and the kind of bearing that speaks of a lifetime of being the most educated person in most rooms. He carries a small notebook. Behind him, a younger doctor, a student, two others whose function you never quite determine. They proceed down the ward with the efficiency of men who have a lot of patience and not very much time. Dr. Cartwright stops at each bed for perhaps 3 to 4 minutes. He feels the pulse. He looks at the tongue. He asks a few questions. He makes a note. He makes a pronouncement to the younger doctor who writes it down. Then he moves on. You watch him work his way down the ward toward you. At bed 10, a man with what appears to be a severe chest infection. His breathing is visible from across the room, each breath a labour, his face the colour of old wax. Dr. Cartwright listens to his chest, frowns slightly, writes something. Bloodletting, he says to the younger doctor. 2 ounces this afternoon. Continue the purging draught. If there's no improvement by Thursday, increase to 4 ounces. The man in bed 10 says nothing. He stares at the ceiling and breathes. 2 ounces of blood removed from a man whose body is already working as hard as it can just to breathe. This is standard medicine. This is the state of the art, 1832. At bed 12, a younger man, maybe your age, with a rash on his neck and wrists and a kind of restless alertness in his eyes that might be anxiety or might be early delirium. Dr. Cartwright doesn't touch him. He stays at a slight distance. Any looseness? He asks the young man. Some, sir, and I've... Vomiting? Once this morning. Dr. Cartwright looks at him for a moment, looks at the student doctor. There is a small communication between them, barely a glance, that you will think about later. Continue the current diet. Rest. We'll reassess tomorrow. He moves to bed 13. The man who has been sleeping or appearing to sleep for as long as you've been here. Dr. Cartwright feels his pulse, lifts his eyelid, writes something, doesn't say what, moves on, bed 14, you. He looks at you with the same expression he has given everyone else. Professional, assessing, not unkind, but not anything warmer than that. You are a case. You're a set of symptoms that require classification and response. Name. Thomas Baxter, sir. How long with the fever? 5 days now. Before admission, any looseness? You answer his questions. He listens, feels your pulse. His fingers are cool and dry, impersonal as the tin spoon. Looks at your tongue, which you extend. Looks at the rash on your chest when you unbutton the hospital shirt. He writes, "You're a mill worker. Carding room, sir. Cotton dust." A brief note. "Any bleeding from the—" "No. We'll bleed you this afternoon. 2 ounces, and a purging draught tonight." He moves to bed 15 before you can say anything. Before you've quite processed the fact that the man who has just examined you for 4 minutes has decided that the correct response to your fever is to remove blood from your body and then force it to empty itself. You lie back against the thin pillow. Joe in bed 15 catches your eye. "Bloodletting?" he asks. "Apparently." He exhales. Not a sigh exactly. Something older than a sigh. A sound that contains a great deal of accumulated opinion on a subject he has decided not to articulate fully. "Drink the water when they give it to you," he says. "After the bloodletting, whatever they say, drink it." "Why?" "Because you'll need it." He closes his eyes. "Don't argue about it. They won't change their minds. Just drink the water after." The bloodletting happens at 2 in the afternoon. The nurse, a different one from Mrs. Plum, this one younger, with a permanently harried expression, comes with a small leather case. Inside the case, the tools. A lancet, narrow and sharp, with a handle worn smooth from use, a shallow dish to catch the blood, a length of bandage. "Left arm," she says. You extend it. The lancet is quick. A small incision at the inside of your elbow. It barely hurts, which surprises you, and then the slow warmth of blood running down your arm into the dish. You watch it. 2 ounces looks, in the dish, like more than you'd expect. A bright arterial red that darkens as it hits the tin. It takes about 10 minutes, then the bandage wrapped tight and a cup of water set on your bedside cabinet, and the nurse is gone. You are already tired. You've been tired for 5 days. But this tiredness is different. It has a physical quality, a dizziness that sits just behind your eyes. The room has slightly too much movement in it. Joe was right. You drink the water. The gruel at supper that evening tastes somehow even worse than it did the night before. You eat it anyway. Let me tell you about where the food comes from. Not because it will make you feel better. It won't. But because this is the thing, the specific, infuriating, shameful thing, that is the whole point of this story. And you can't understand it from inside the ward, lying in bed, eating grey gruel with a tin spoon. You need the context. You need to know what's happening in the kitchen 2 floors below, while Dr. Cartwright is making his rounds above. The Manchester Infirmary receives its charitable donations from wealthy Manchester merchants. Textile men, mostly. Cotton manufacturers. Men who have made fortunes from the same mills where the people in the poor wards work themselves into fevers and chest infections and industrial injuries. Men who attend church on Sunday and feel the warm satisfaction of civic virtue when they write a cheque to the infirmary and see their name in the annual report. These men give money. The infirmary has a budget. And here is where it gets specifically, infuriatingly, particularly outrageous, rather than just generally bad. The budget for a charity patient's food is approximately 4 pence per day. 4 pence for 3 meals. You need to know what 4 pence can buy in 1832 Manchester. It can buy approximately half a loaf of bread, or a small amount of coarse oatmeal. Or, if you are creative, if you have connections, if you know a supplier who is willing to sell you something that is at the very outer edge of edibility but technically still food, a quantity of root vegetables that no household would choose to purchase, but that can, with sufficient water and cooking time, be transformed into something hot. The man responsible for the infirmary's kitchen is a contractor named Edward Sumner. He is not employed by the infirmary. He is contracted to provide food for the charity patients at a price slightly below the budget, keeping the difference as profit. This arrangement is not unusual. This arrangement is, in fact, standard practice. Edward Sumner has been providing food to the Manchester Infirmary charity wards for 11 years. In those 11 years, he has learned to work the margins with the precision of a man who understands that the people eating his food have no alternative and no voice. He buys turnips from market traders who have turnips left over from the week. Turnips that the housewives of Manchester have already inspected and declined. He buys them at a significant discount. Some of these turnips are fine, a little past their best, perhaps slightly soft in places, but nutritionally sound. These go into the pot, into your bowl, into the grey gruel. Some of these turnips are not fine. Some of these turnips have, at their cores or at their edges, patches of softness that have moved beyond softness into something else. A brown-grey colour. A smell, when cut, that the kitchen staff know not to investigate too closely. A texture that is the texture of something that has already begun the process of returning to earth. These turnips also go into the pot, because the pot is large, and the cooking is long, and there are 40 patients to feed, and the budget is 4 pence. The annual report of the Manchester Infirmary for 1832 will describe the patient diet as generous and nutritious, consisting of oatmeal gruel, bread, broth, and when medically indicated, meat. The meat is for patients specifically ordered by a physician to receive meat. This is perhaps 8% of the charity ward patients in any given month. The rest get the gruel. And the gruel is grey, and some of the things floating in it, if you look at them long enough with the attention that your fever and your boredom and your growing suspicion provide, some of those things are soft in a way that turnips should not be soft. In a way that, if you were a different kind of person in a different kind of situation, would make you push the bowl away. You eat the whole bowl, every meal, because you are hungry, because you are sick, because your body is trying very hard to fight a fever and has discovered that fighting fevers requires fuel, and there is no other fuel available. You eat it, and you try not to think about the edges of the turnip pieces, and you drink the water after the bloodletting, and you try to sleep. The nights are their own particular experience. Sleep in the ward is not sleep the way sleep is in your small room at Mrs. Hartley's, where the only sounds are the street below and the occasional creak of the building settling. Sleep here is something you do around the sounds. The coughing doesn't stop at night. It gets worse, if anything, as the bodies in the room cool slightly and the chests tighten. It runs down the ward in waves. One person starts, triggers another, spreads to a third, then gradually stills, then starts again. The man in bed 12, the one with the rash, the one Dr. Cartwright didn't touch and stood slightly further from than the others, has started to have bad nights, he mutters. Not words you can make out, just sounds. Sounds that are not distressed exactly, but are in the neighbourhood of distress. A narration of something happening somewhere behind his eyes. You learn from Joe that this is the beginning of what happens with that kind. That kind? Joe looks at you, looks at bed 12. The Blue Death, he says quietly. Not a whisper, that would draw attention, but pitched to you alone. Cholera. The word has weight. You've heard it for months. Everyone in Manchester has heard it for months. You've read the notices on the walls. You've known people who've lost neighbours, but knowing and seeing are different things. Knowing and lying 20 feet away in a room with closed windows, breathing the same air, that is a different thing entirely. He'll be moved, Joe says, when they're sure. They've got a fever ward for him. He pauses, chooses the next word with the care of a man who understands that words have the power of things in places like this. For the bad cases. When will they move him? Tomorrow, probably, if he gets worse tonight. He gets worse that night. You wake to the sound. A sound you won't ever be able to fully describe afterward, but that you'll remember for the rest of your life. A kind of retching that has no dignity in it. A sound that the body makes when it has been ambushed at its foundations. There is movement. The night nurse, suddenly present, which means she was awake or almost awake. She has seen this before, knows what this sounds like, moves with practiced speed. A screen brought from somewhere, placed around bed 12. Sounds behind the screen, then silence, then the sound of the night nurse leaving and returning with someone else, and muffled conversation and more movement. By the time grey dawn is leaking through the high windows, bed 12 is empty. The sheets have been removed. The mattress has been turned. By the time Mrs. Plum arrives with the morning bowls of gruel, a new patient is being walked to bed 12. An older woman with a broken leg crying quietly, supported by a younger woman who is probably her daughter, and who has to leave after settling her in because the charity ward visiting hours are between 2 and 4 in the afternoon, and it is 7 in the morning. The ward absorbs the exchange with the equanimity of a place that has made many such exchanges and expects to make many more. Joe watches the old woman being settled in, then he looks at you. Eat your gruel, he says, while it's hot. You've been in the ward for 3 days when you finally have a real conversation with Joe, not because you didn't want to earlier, but because in the first 2 days the fever is bad enough that conversation requires more concentration than you have. You answer questions, you respond to immediate things, but real conversation, the kind where you're both present, both paying attention, that requires a fever that has subsided at least slightly. On day 3, yours does, not gone, not even close to gone. But down from the roaring intensity of the first days to something more manageable, a persistent heat, a heaviness, a sense of being slightly disconnected from the ordinary world, like looking at everything through old glass. But enough to talk. Joe's name is Joseph Catterall. He is 61 years old. He spent 32 years working in a dye works on the south side of the city. His hands are still faintly stained, even after years of washing, with a blue-grey tinge in the creases of his knuckles that the dye's left behind like a mark of ownership. He has a wife, Martha, who visits on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons between 2 and 4. He has 2 daughters, both married, both in other cities. He has a son who went to sea and hasn't been heard from in 5 years, and the way Joe mentions this, carefully, briefly, looking at the ceiling, tells you everything about the weight of that particular silence. He's been in the ward for 2 weeks already, a chest infection that settled into his lungs with the stubbornness of something that intends to stay. He's better than he was. He can sit up now, can talk without coughing, but not better in the way that means going home. What does the doctor say? You ask. He says I'm progressing satisfactorily. Joe says this with the exact tone of voice of a man who's been told something in official language and has translated it privately into something more honest. Which means he's not sure. Which means wait and see. He looks at the ceiling. The ceiling of the ward is high. The builders made it high, which was considered important for the miasma theory. The idea that the bad air would rise and disperse up there somehow, rather than remaining at breathing level. It doesn't work. The ceiling is just a long way away. You know what they told me when I came in, Joe says. My diet would be generous and restorative, full nutrition, everything I need to recover. The gruel, he confirms, and the bread, when they remember the bread. He pauses. Martha brings things. When she visits, hides them in her coat. Some bread, real bread, made at home. Sometimes a small piece of cheese. She's not supposed to. The rules say no outside food. Do they enforce it? Depends on the nurse. Mrs. Plum looks the other way. The other one, the young one with the harried face, she took a piece of pie off a man in bed 3 last Thursday. Why? Because those are the rules. He looks at you. And because there are rules and there are rules, and some rules are about running an institution properly, and some rules are about reminding people where they stand. You think about this. The doctors eat well, you ask? Not bitterly, it's a genuine question. You want to understand the geography of the place. I expect so. Dr. Cartwright has a house in Ardwick. Goes home for lunch, I think. Doesn't eat here. Joe glances toward the door of the ward, the door that leads to the corridor, the staircase, the other parts of the building where different things happen. The private patients eat well. I've heard from one of the kitchen girls. Broth with actual chicken in it. Bread that was baked that morning. For the bad cases, beef tea. His voice is entirely neutral as he says this. No anger in it. Or rather, the anger has been there so long it has become something quieter, more foundational. Beef tea, proper beef tea made from real beef for the private patients who can afford to pay. Grey turnip gruel for the charity ward. This is not a secret. Nobody is trying to hide it. It is simply the way things are organised, the way resources are allocated, the way the world is understood to work. The people who pay more get more. The people who get charity get what charity provides. And what charity provides is grey gruel. And what the grey gruel is made from is, well, you're starting to have suspicions. Day 4 is the day you find out. You're able to get up on day 4. Still shouldn't, probably. Mrs. Plum gives you a look when she sees you sitting on the edge of the bed, feet on the cold floor. But the alternative is lying on your back and staring at the ceiling for another 12 hours, and you've begun to understand, viscerally, what long-term bed rest does to a person's mind. The ceiling has no new information. You've studied it entirely. Stay in the ward, Mrs. Plum says. Don't go beyond the corridor door. Just to the corridor? She considers this with the expression of a woman who knows the rules and also knows which rules matter and which rules are obstacles to getting through the day without incident. To the top of the staircase, she says. No further. If Dr. Cartwright comes and you're not in bed, I'll hear the door. She doesn't say yes. She doesn't say no. She moves on to bed 13. You make your way to the door. The corridor is long and relatively quiet at this hour, mid-morning, between the doctor's rounds and the midday meal. The floor is flagstone, cold through the thin soles of your hospital-issued slippers. The walls have that same yellowing white paint. You walk to the top of the staircase and sit on the top step, your back against the wall, and breathe. The air in the stairwell is better than in the ward. Not good. It still has the institutional smell, the carbolic and underlying sickness. But there is movement in it. A slight draught from somewhere below. It moves across your face, and for a moment you feel almost like yourself. Almost like the person who walked to work 5 days ago and thought the worst thing about the day was going to be the cotton dust. And then a sound from below, the ground floor, a door opening, footsteps, not the quick, harried footsteps of nurses, but the heavy, unhurried footsteps of someone carrying something. A voice, mind the step. Another voice, answering. The sound of something being set down. A heavy sound. A wet, heavy sound. The sound of something in a container being put on a stone floor. And then, the smell. It rises up the staircase with the unhurried confidence of something that has nowhere else to be. You know this smell. You've been eating it for 4 days, but you've only been smelling it at close quarters, in a bowl, at room temperature or slightly above. Smelling it now, rising fresh and concentrated from below, from whatever container has just been set down on the ground floor. It is the smell of turnips that have gone wrong, not violently, not the dramatic, unmistakable smell of something rotting in the summer heat, but the smell of something that is past its moment, the smell of organic matter in the process of returning to itself, a sweetness underneath the earthiness that should not be sweet, a softness of smell that mirrors the softness you've been finding in the bowl. You sit on the top step of the staircase and breathe it in. You don't go down. You can hear the voices from below, and you understand without being told that your presence would be noticed and unwanted. But you sit there long enough to hear. Same as last week. Maybe more of the soft ones. He gets what he gets. Mix it in. The heat takes care of. I know. I'm just saying, I'm not paying you to say. The sound of water being pumped. The sound of something large being moved. And underneath all of it, the smell, that specific, unmistakable smell that answers the question you've been not quite asking for 4 days. The heat takes care of it. That's what he said. The heat takes care of it. The heat of cooking, he means. The long, slow heat that breaks down the turnip fibres, that dissolves the worst of what's gone wrong, that transforms the evidence of decay into a grey soft nothing that floats in the gruel, and that a hungry sick person who has no alternative and no voice will eat because eating it is better than not eating. The heat takes care of it. You sit on the top step for a while longer. Then you go back to bed 14. You pull the rough wool blanket up to your chin. You lie there with your eyes open and look at the ceiling. At 6 o'clock, the kitchen girl brings the evening gruel. You eat it. You eat it because you're still sick and your body still needs fuel and there is nothing else. You eat it because going without is not a viable option when you are fighting a fever with blood loss and purging draughts and the collective medical wisdom of 1832 ranged against you. You eat it because sometimes the question is not what is right, but what keeps you alive until something better becomes possible. You eat the whole bowl. Joe watches you without comment. There is a boy in bed 7. You notice him properly on day 5, when the fever has come down enough that you can look at the room rather than just existing in it. He's perhaps 14, 15 at the most. Dark hair plastered flat against his skull. His face, when he's awake, has that particular quality that badly sick children have. A transparency, almost, as if the illness has worn the surface thinner. He's a factory worker. You learn this from Joe, who's had more time in the ward and more energy for observation. Works in a spinning mill. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, has been doing it since he was 9. The reason he's in bed 7 is that one of the spinning machines caught his right hand 5 days ago. His right hand is bandaged from the wrist down. The bandage is changed every morning by Mrs. Plum, and from the sound of it, you cannot see the hand from your bed, but you can hear the sound of the unbandaging, the brief intake of breath that the boy tries to suppress. The hand is not healing the way a hand should heal. The doctors have been discussing in the corridor outside the ward the possibility of amputation. They're not sure yet. They're waiting to see if the infection spreads. The boy's name is William. No one calls him William. Everyone calls him Billy. He has a mother who visits on Tuesday afternoons and who sits beside the bed holding his uninjured hand with both of hers and doesn't speak much but stays for the full 2 hours. On Tuesday afternoon, you watch from bed 14. You watch his mother, who is maybe 35 and looks 50, sit beside her son and hold his hand. She has brought something in her coat. Bread, probably, same as Martha brings for Joe, and she slips it to him with the practiced ease of someone who has done this before, who knows which nurse is on duty and how far her peripheral vision extends. Billy eats the bread with his left hand. He eats it with an expression of absolute concentration, the way you eat something when you're deeply hungry and also deeply aware that this is the best thing you'll have for a while. The expression of someone tasting something real. And you think about the distance between Billy's face while he eats the bread his mother brought and Billy's face at 6 o'clock when the gruel arrives. It is not that the gruel makes him visibly distressed. He is 14. He has been working 12-hour days since he was 9. He's not had the luxury of distress about food. He eats it the same way you eat it, because it's what's there. But the bread, the way he eats the bread, that expression is what eating should look like. This is the part of the story where I have to tell you about the Anatomy Act. It's 1832. You already know that bodies are worth money. Maybe you know this from stories, from newspaper reports, from the general awareness that everybody in Manchester has by now of the body snatching problem. The body snatching problem in 1832 England is this. Medical schools need bodies to teach anatomy. The law only allows them to use the bodies of executed criminals. There are not enough executed criminals. Therefore there is a black market in recently buried corpses, dug up by resurrection men and sold to anatomists for anywhere between £8 and £12 per body. Parliament has been debating what to do about this for years. The answer they've settled on, the Anatomy Act of 1832, which is being debated at this exact moment while you lie in bed 14, is as follows. Instead of just using the bodies of executed criminals, Medical schools will now also be allowed to use the bodies of paupers who die in workhouses and hospitals without anyone to claim them. In other words, if you die in the Manchester Infirmary's charity ward and nobody comes to claim your body within 48 hours, you go to the anatomists. The Act hasn't passed yet. It will pass in August of this year. But the rumour is in the ward. You learn this from the man in bed 8, a former labourer with a leg that has gone wrong in some fundamental way that the doctors are also debating about quietly in the corridor. He's been here longer than anyone else in the ward at the moment, 2 months. They're going to pass a law, he says, one afternoon when 3 of you, him, you, Joe, are all awake and the ward is as close to quiet as it gets. Heard one of the doctors talking about it. What kind of law, you say? Hospital poor who die. The body goes to the medical men for cutting up. He says it flatly. Unless someone claims it in time. Joe looks at the ceiling. Martha would claim me, he says. My lad would claim me, the man from bed 8 says. Pause. Probably. You think about your own situation. Your mother in Cheshire, 3 hours away by coach. Mrs. Hartley, who has already indicated she considers her responsibilities toward you to be limited. Your overseer at the mill, who is a decent man but not a close one. That's the plan then, says Joe after a while. Send us here to get better, feed us the gruel, and if we don't, that's the plan, says the man from bed 8. There is a silence, not a depressed silence, more the silence of people who have been given information that is bad but not, given the general shape of their lives, surprising. Well, says Joe, best not die then. The man from bed 8 laughs, then catches himself and winces because laughing does something to his leg. Aye, he says, best not. Day 6. The fever breaks. You know it immediately when you wake. The sheets are soaked through, and you're cold in the particular clean way of something that has passed, rather than the cold of something arriving. The heaviness behind your eyes is less. The room is not spinning. You are weak. The weakness is profound, the kind that comes from days of fever and 2 bloodlettings and 3 purging, draughts and gruel made from turnips that have known better days. You feel hollowed out, as if something has passed through you and taken the non-essential parts along with it. But the fever is down. Mrs. Plum notices immediately on her morning rounds, feels your pulse, looks at your eyes, makes a note. You're better, she says. It's not warm, it's not cold, it is purely informational. Yes, you say. Dr. Cartwright will assess you this morning. He does. He goes through the examination with the same efficiency as before. Pulse, tongue, questions. Better, he confirms. We'll discontinue the bleeding. Continue the restorative diet for another 3 days, then we'll consider discharge. Restorative diet. You look at him. He's writing in his notebook. His face is entirely sincere. He is not lying to you. He genuinely believes that what you've been eating is restorative. He has read the contractor's description of the diet. He has probably never tasted the gruel. He has certainly never smelled the turnips arriving at the kitchen door. Yes, sir, you say. He moves on to bed 15. Joe gets his discharge date. 2 more days. Martha comes on Thursday afternoon and he tells her, and she cries a little, quietly, which she manages to do without making any sound. You have the impression this is a skill she has refined over a long marriage to a man who works in a dye works and is therefore frequently in danger of one kind or another. Billy, in bed 7, does not get a discharge date. The infection in his hand has not spread, which is the good news. The hand itself, Dr. Cartwright makes a decision about the hand on Thursday morning, early before the main ward round. You hear it happening, the screen going up around bed 7, the sounds of medical work, Billy making a sound once that he immediately suppresses, then quiet, then the screen coming down. When you can see bed 7 again, Billy is lying with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling, his right arm ending at the wrist in fresh bandages. Mrs. Plum comes with the morning gruel. Billy takes his bowl with his left hand. He eats it. You're discharged on the morning of the 9th day. Mrs. Plum hands you your numbered ticket, 847, and you go to the desk in the entrance hall and exchange it for your coat. The coat has been folded. It looks slightly different than when you left it, slightly flattened, slightly other, as if it has had its own experiences in the store. You put it on, and it is familiar in the way home is familiar. Not perfect, but yours. The clerk at the desk gives you a paper, a discharge certificate confirming your treatment. It says, Patient Thomas Baxter, admitted, date, presenting with continued fever of 4 days, treated with standard restorative diet, bloodletting on 2 occasions, and purging draughts. Patient has recovered satisfactorily and is hereby discharged to full health. It is recommended that the patient rest for 3 further days before resuming his occupation. Standard restorative diet. You fold the paper, put it in your coat pocket, you walk out the front door of the Manchester Infirmary and into the March morning. The air hits you first, cold and sharp and full of coal smoke and the smell of the city. But it moves. It has movement in it, a slight wind coming from the west, carrying something like the memory of fields and open spaces. After 9 days in a room with closed windows, it is extraordinary. You stand on the steps for a moment, just breathing it. The city spreads out in front of you. Piccadilly, busy with its morning traffic, carts and carriages and people moving with the purposefulness of people who have somewhere to be and are trying to get there. The sound of horses, the shout of a vendor. Somewhere, the distant mill bells marking the start of a shift. Your legs are weak under you. Not dangerously, you can walk. But you're aware of them in a way you weren't before. The way you're aware of a mechanism that has been tested and has passed the test but is still warm from the effort. You walk, slowly, down Piccadilly toward Market Street, toward the familiar streets of your neighbourhood, toward Mrs. Hartley's house, toward the small room with its own smell of coal dust and Mrs. Hartley's boiled cabbage, and the particular dampness of a building that has always been slightly too close to the river. You pass a church. The doors are open. It's not Sunday, it's a Thursday, but there are people going in. Maybe a morning service, maybe something else. You look at the people going in. Decent working people mostly. The kind who keep themselves clean and wear their best on Sundays and try. You keep walking. You pass a print shop, and in the window, among the maps and the political prints and the portraits of the king, there is a handbill. One of the Board of Health notices about cholera. You read it as you pass. The Board of Health reminds the public that cholera is spread by miasma and noxious air. The poor are advised to maintain cleanliness of person and dwelling. In the case of illness, the infirmary and fever hospitals are available for treatment of deserving cases. Deserving cases. You walk on. I want to take a moment here, before we drift towards sleep, to tell you something about the 1832 cholera epidemic and what it meant. Because this is the thing that haunts 1832 specifically, not just the gruel, not just the closed windows and the bloodletting and the food contractor cutting his margins on rotting turnips. The cholera is the shape behind everything else. Between 1831 and 1832, the first cholera epidemic in Britain killed approximately 32,000 people. In Manchester, several hundred died. In London, several thousand. This was not the Black Death. This was not medieval. This was modern. This was 1832, 3 years before the railways, the same year the Reform Act passed, the year Charles Darwin set sail on the Beagle. This was the era of steam engines and industrial revolution and the absolute certainty of progress. And cholera arrived, and the miasma theory couldn't explain it properly, and the hospitals couldn't treat it, and the people who died were almost entirely poor. This is not a coincidence. Cholera spreads through contaminated water. In 1832, the poor of Manchester share water sources. They share pumps. They share rivers that also receive the overflow of the city's sewage. They live in conditions, 20 people to a room, 4 families to a house, entire courts sharing a single privy, that are perfectly designed to transmit waterborne illness. The wealthy of Manchester have private water supplies, individual pumps, wells that are not downstream of the worst contamination. When cholera comes, it comes to the poor first and hardest and most completely. And then it comes to the hospital. And in the hospital, the poor who are already sick lie in wards with closed windows, eating gruel that is not nutritious, being bled and purged by doctors whose treatments make them weaker, not stronger, in beds pushed close together, breathing the same air. John Snow, the doctor who will prove that cholera spreads through water, not air, is 12 years old in 1832. He is in Newcastle, possibly watching the epidemic pass through his city, with the alertes of a young man who is going to spend his adult life asking questions that make people uncomfortable. He will not publish his great work on cholera until 1849. Until then, the windows will stay closed. Until then, the gruel. Until then, 4 pence a day. But here is the thing. Here is the thing that I want you to carry with you into sleep tonight, if you can hold it and still rest. The people in that ward, Joe Catterall with his blue-stained hands, Billy with his terrible bandaged wrist, the man from bed 8 with his uncertain leg, the woman brought in to replace the cholera patient in bed 12, all the others whose names you don't know, they got up every day. They ate the gruel. They lay in the beds that weren't quite clean enough. They submitted to the bloodletting and the purging draughts. They breathed the thick air of a room with closed windows. They listened to each other cough through the nights, and most of them lived. Not because of the treatment, not because of the restorative diet that wasn't restorative, or the bloodletting that took what little strength they had, or the purging that emptied them further. They lived because human bodies are extraordinary, because the capacity to survive is in most cases more powerful than the forces arrayed against it, because Joe Catterall went home to Martha on Friday afternoon and sat in his chair by the kitchen fire and ate real food and slept in his own bed, because you walked out the door with your coat and your discharge certificate and your weak legs and your 9 days of institutional gruel inside you, and you kept walking. That is not a small thing. 3 days after your discharge, you go back to work. You shouldn't, probably. The certificate said 3 days rest, and you've taken them, lying in your room at Mrs. Hartley's, eating proper food. Mrs. Hartley, in a moment of unexpected tenderness, brings you a bowl of real oatmeal on your first morning back, made with milk and actual sugar, and stands in the doorway watching you eat it with an expression that defies classification. Sleeping in your own bed, in the cold room that smells of damp and coal but is yours. 3 days, then the mill. The overseer, a man named Hargreaves, broad and fair and fundamentally decent in the way of a man who knows his workers are people, but is constrained in how much he can act on this, looks at you when you walk in and says, "Better, are you?" "Better enough," you say. He nods, hands you back to the carding room. The carding room is the same as it always is, loud and warm and full of cotton dust that you breathe in and that settles on every surface, and that will, if you stay in this room for 30 years, do things to your lungs that you'd rather not think about. You take your place. Your hands find the familiar work. The rhythm of it comes back quickly. The body remembers what the mind is still adjusting to. Cotton dust in your lungs. 14 hours. The same smell of oil as machinery and the sweat of the people around you. And underneath it all, somewhere deep and quiet, the smell of grey gruel. The memory of it. The specific, particular smell of turnips that have known better days, carried in water and oats, served in a tin bowl with a tin spoon at 6 o'clock in a ward with closed windows. That smell will stay with you for a long time. Not because it was the worst thing. There were worse things in that building, the sounds of the night, Billy's wrist, the cholera patient being carried out behind the screen. There were worse things by far. But the gruel is the specific central thing. The gruel is the place where the whole arrangement of 1832 medicine and 1832 poverty and 1832 charitable institutions crystallizes into something you can hold in your hands and look at. A bowl of grey liquid with soft things floating in it. Turnips that Edward Sumner bought at a discount because they were past what a household would use. The heat takes care of it, he said. The heat takes care of the evidence of decay, takes care of the visible wrongness, transforms it into grey nothing. And the annual report says, generous and nutritious. And the doctors say, restorative diet. And you eat the whole bowl, every meal. Because what else do you do? This is what medicine looked like in 1832. Not for everyone. Not for the people in the private wards with their beef tea and their morning baked bread and their doctors who spent more than 4 minutes at the bedside. But for the poor, for the charity cases, for the majority of the people who actually got sick in this city that had made itself in 50 years and hadn't yet figured out what it owed the people who built it. This is what care looked like when care was a charity arrangement, and charity was a business, and the business was to feed 40 people on 4 pence a day and keep the difference and describe it in the annual report as generous. The Anatomy Act passed in August 1832. From that point on, if you died in a workhouse or charity hospital without family to claim you, your body went to the medical schools for dissection. The body snatchers went out of business, more or less. The supply problem was solved by using the bodies of the poor, who had been fed the turnip gruel, who had been bled and purged, who had lain in wards with closed windows breathing the collective exhalations of the very illness the doctors believed was caused by bad air. The Reform Act also passed in 1832. The new voters who gained the franchise, the middle class, the property owners, the people with something to protect, began the long process of reforming institutions. The workhouses were reformed, sort of, in 1834. The hospitals improved, slowly, over decades. Florence Nightingale arrived with her lamp and her mortality statistics in 1854, and she was angry, correctly angry, and persistent, productively persistent, and some things changed. John Snow proved the cholera water connection in 1849, and nobody listened for a long time, but eventually they did. Joseph Lister introduced antiseptic surgical technique in 1865. Hands got washed. Eventually, windows got opened. Eventually, the food got better. Slowly, unevenly, with constant resistance from the people whose job it was to provide it cheaply, but eventually. But in 1832, in the Manchester Infirmary, in the charity ward, in bed 14, the gruel is grey, and the turnips have soft edges, and the heat takes care of it, and you eat the whole bowl because you are hungry, because you are sick, because your body needs something to fight the fever with, and this is what's available. Because the alternative to eating it is lying there with nothing, and lying there with nothing is worse. You eat it, and you live. And on a Thursday morning in the second week of March, you walk out the door with your coat number 847, and your discharge certificate and your weak legs and the memory of grey gruel, and you keep walking. That's enough. That's more than enough. Come back to where you are now. You're not in Manchester. You're not in 1832. You're wherever you are. Warm, most likely, or at least in a place where warmth is available if you need it. Fed, probably. Your legs, tomorrow, will carry you where you need to go without the particular weakness of a body that has just survived something it was not designed to survive. You have access to things that Thomas Baxter did not. Food that is what it says it is. Water that is clean, or at least significantly cleaner. Medicine that has, for the most part, moved past the era of removing blood from sick people and calling it treatment. Hospitals with washed hands and known germ theory and antibiotics and all the accumulated hundreds of years of people asking questions and refusing to accept that the way things are is the way they have to be. Semmelweis washing his hands in Vienna, Snow mapping the cholera in Soho, Nightingale counting her mortality statistics, Lister pouring carbolic acid on wounds, all of them standing against the institutional confidence of people who were certain they were right and making things worse. All of them, in their various ways, saying, look at what's actually happening, not what the annual report says. What's actually in the bowl. That is the work. In every era, in every institution, in every place where power decides how to treat the people who need things. That is the work. Look at what's actually in the bowl. Now let the day go. Let it go the way the fever broke. Not dramatically, not all at once, but with the slow certainty of something that has passed its peak and is moving toward resolution. Your thoughts are slowing. The cotton mill, the ward, the smell of grey gruel and carbolic, and the particular smell of coal smoke air that you breathed on the steps of the infirmary that Thursday morning. All of it drifting away. Not forgotten, just quieter. You've heard this story now. You've been in the ward, in the bed, in the fever. You've eaten the gruel. You've smelled the staircase. You've watched Joe go home to Martha with his blue-stained hands and his discharge certificate. You've survived it, which is more than some did. It's enough, more than enough, more than can be asked of any person in any ward, in any city, in any year. Let the sounds of where you are come back. Whatever's around you. The sounds of a building settling into night. The particular quiet of the hours past midnight. Breathing, yours, possibly someone else's, slow and regular, and not the terrible layered coughing of 40 people trying to sleep. Clean air, moving. The windows wherever you are can be opened. Tomorrow there will be things, obligations, decisions, the small and large demands of a day that has not happened yet. But tomorrow is tomorrow. Right now there is just this. The warmth of wherever you are. The slowing of everything. The sound of your own breathing, regular and steady, in a body that is not fighting a fever, that is not waiting for the morning gruel, that is simply resting. You're warm enough. You're safe enough. You're here. Centuries have passed since Thomas Baxter ate his 9 days of grey gruel and walked out the door of the Manchester infirmary in his coat. The building he walked out of is gone. Manchester rebuilt itself, as Manchester does. It is a city that rebuilds itself with the restless energy of a place that cannot quite sit still. The streets he walked have been widened, renamed, rerouted. The mill on Great Ancoat Street has been converted to something else, or demolished, or absorbed into the general redevelopment of a city that has spent 2 centuries trying to figure out what to do with its industrial past. But people still live in Manchester, still get sick, still walk through hospital doors with the particular vulnerability of someone who needs help and is hoping the help is real, still eat meals in hospital beds and think about home, still, in some wards, in some years, in some systems, get fed something that is not quite what the paperwork says it is. The gruel problem didn't end in 1832. It transformed, put on different clothes, found new vocabulary. The annual reports got more sophisticated. The language of nutritious and restorative got more technical, more backed by official-seeming documentation. But the question underneath it, who deserves what when they need something, and what we're willing to spend on those who have nothing, that question didn't go away. It never goes away. The human beings in the beds, trying to get better, trying to get home to Martha and the kitchen fire, they don't go away either. They eat the whole bowl, because they're hungry and they're sick and it's what's there. And then, if the universe is willing and the fever breaks, they walk out the door, and they keep walking. But before I let you sleep, before we get there, I need to go back, because I skipped something. I skipped the parts between the morning round and the evening gruel, between the moment you lie down and stare at the ceiling and the moment you close your eyes and hope the next thing you feel is morning. The between parts are the hospital, not the doctors, not the medicine, the between. Here is what was there. You wake before the ward wakes. This is what fever does to sleep. It does not deepen it. It thins it. It makes sleep into something porous, something you pass through rather than descend into, something that returns you to the surface at unpredictable intervals, slightly more disoriented than when you went under. You wake, and it is dark. Not the dark of your room at Mrs. Hartley's, where dark means the shutters are closed and the street outside has gone quiet. This is institutional dark, the dark of a room that is full of people and has been for hours, and the collective warmth and breath of those people has made the darkness thick and weighted. The ward breathes. That's the only way to describe it. 40 people, sleeping or trying to, and the sound of their breathing has merged into something that is the sound of the ward itself, not synchronized, not together, but layered. 40 separate rhythms, overlapping, creating something you feel in your chest as much as here. Underneath that, the coughing. It never fully stops. Even in the deepest part of the night, there is always someone. A chest that has been quiet for an hour and then isn't. A sound that starts as a clearing, tentative, almost apologetic, and then becomes something more committed. Something that seems to wake the person doing it as much as the people around them, so that after a particularly bad bout you can hear the small sounds of a person coming fully awake, disoriented, confused about where they are, and then remembering. That small sound, the sound of someone remembering they are in a hospital ward and not home, is one of the saddest sounds you will ever hear. You lie in bed 14 and listen to it happening. 3 beds down. You're shivering slightly. The fever runs in waves. Better for a few hours, worse for a few hours. The body's internal temperature negotiating with the illness for territory. Right now it is the fever's turn. There is sweat between your shoulder blades and on the backs of your knees, which is an unpleasant sensation at the best of times and is considerably worse when the thing you have to lie on is a thin straw mattress that can only absorb so much before it stops trying. You feel the mattress beneath you, not just its thinness. You've felt that since the first hour, but its specific texture. The way the straw inside it has compacted under the weight of all the bodies that have lain here before yours, so that the mattress is not uniformly thin but selectively thin. Thin in the places where human bodies predictably rest their weight, the shoulders and hips and the curve of the lower back. You have found these grooves and you lie in them because the choice is the groove or the raised ridges between the grooves, and the grooves are better. But not comfortable. Nobody is claiming comfortable. Your feet are cold. The blanket does not quite reach, no matter how you arrange it. You've tried every configuration. The blanket is exactly 1.5 times the length required to cover you if you curl slightly, which means some part of you is always uncovered. If you pull it up to your chin, your feet are out. If you cover your feet, your shoulders are bare. You choose shoulders. The cold at your feet is a steady, low-level misery that you've stopped actively noticing. It's there, the way the coughing is there, the way the smell is there, a constant that has become background. 3 hours until morning, or 4. You can't see a clock. The only way you know time is passing is by the church bell somewhere outside, muffled by the closed windows to the point where you can hear them but can't always count them accurately. An hour ago, you think, it was 3, which means it's somewhere around 4 now. The night nurse, a different woman from Mrs. Plum, older, heavier in her step with a candle she holds at shoulder height as she does her rounds, passes the end of your bed without looking at you. You watch the light from her candle move across the ceiling, track it down the ward, and then she's past the far door and gone. Silence. Relative silence. The ward's breathing. The coughing. You think about your room at Mrs. Hartley's again, the specifics of it. The crack in the plaster on the wall beside the window that looks like a river running toward the sea. The smell of coal dust and slightly damp wood. The sound of the street below on Saturday evenings, when the mills have released their workers and the workers have made their way to the places where workers go on Saturday evenings. These are small, ordinary things, the kind of things you don't notice when they're present. You notice them now. The particular sound your door makes when you close it. The way the light from the street lamp below comes through the gap in the shutters and draws a thin line across the floor at a specific angle that changes as the night progresses. The fact that you can open the shutters any time you want to. The fact that no one controls when you breathe. You think about opening a window. You think about it the way a person thinks about water when they're thirsty. Not as an actual immediate possibility, but as something to hold in the mind. The pleasure of imagining it, the clean cold air coming in, the sound of the city at night, actual city sounds rather than the filtered, muffled version you've been getting through glass and closed frames. You think about it until the thinking becomes something softer, and the something softer becomes something less like thinking. The 4th hour bell rings somewhere outside. You are possibly briefly asleep. The ward wakes by degrees. It is not one waking, not a single moment when consciousness returns to 40 people at once. It is a cascade, slow and stumbling. One person, then another, then a third, stirred by the sound of the first, or by their own body's internal rhythms, or by the specific quality of early light that begins filtering through the high windows sometime around 6 in the morning. By the time Mrs. Plum arrives at 6:30, maybe a third of the ward is awake. She carries a large brass bell, which she rings once, just once, and not loudly, at the door. This is the official waking signal. The rest of the ward joins the conscious world with varying degrees of willingness. The night nurse has already emptied the pots. You need to understand what this means in practical terms, because the management of bodily needs in a hospital ward of 1832 is one of those things that people in comfortable positions tend not to think about very carefully, and which is, for the people actually experiencing it, a significant and ongoing source of misery. There are no private facilities, there are no facilities at all, beyond the ceramic pot kept under each bed. The pot is used in the dark when necessary. It is emptied in the morning by the night nurse before her shift ends, carried, covered, out of the ward and down to wherever these things go. The smell of the ward in the early morning, before the pots are fully emptied, and before any of the morning cleaning has happened, is its own distinct experience. Mrs. Plum does not comment on it. She has been breathing this air for however many years she's been doing this job, and she has achieved the state of not noticing that is a professional requirement. You have not achieved this state. On day 2, you likely will not achieve it. You breathe through your mouth and watch the ceiling and wait for the morning to progress past this particular stage. After the pots comes the washing. Each patient is given a small basin of water, cold, slightly grey, the same water that's been sitting in a barrel somewhere since yesterday, and a rough cloth. You wash what you can reach from the horizontal, face, neck, hands. The cloth has the texture of something that has been washed many times in hard water with no softening agent, and has arrived at the far end of the softening spectrum. Your face, when the cloth touches it, feels the roughness the way skin that has been softened by fever feels everything, too acutely, as if the usual protective layer between yourself and the world has thinned. You wash anyway. Then the morning gruel arrives. It is the same as the evening gruel. You had briefly entertained the hope that morning might bring something different, that there might be a distinction between meals. There is not. Morning, midday, evening, gruel. Sometimes with a piece of bread, the bread being of a quality that suggests it may have been fresh at some earlier point in its life but has since moved on. The morning gruel is slightly thicker than the evening gruel, which might mean it has been made more recently, or might mean a different ratio in the pot. You do not investigate this theory. You eat it. The tin spoon, the tin bowl, the grey liquid, the soft things. You eat it looking at the wall. Here is what a day sounds like, in the ward, if you lie still and pay attention. 6:30, the bell, the gradual waking. The sounds of 40 people remembering where they are. 7, the pots being dealt with. The morning wash. The specific sound of the rough cloth against the ceramic basin. A dry scraping sound. The sound of people who are too sick or too stiff to sit up being helped to sit up by Mrs. Plum, who does this efficiently and without apparent effort, the way someone who has lifted sick people into sitting positions for years has developed the specific technique of it. 7:30, the gruel. the sound of 40 tin bowls being distributed, the specific particular sound of tin spoon against tin bowl, a sound that you already know, associate with this place for the rest of your life. Every time you hear metal against metal, something in your body will briefly remember this. 8. The eating. The ward gets quieter during eating, which makes a certain kind of sense. Even here, even this food, eating requires a concentration that quiets conversation. The coughing is still there, but it is somewhat overlaid by the sound of 40 people eating from tin bowls. 8:30, the first conversations of the day. The ward has its own social geography, its own patterns of connection that have been established over days and weeks of proximity. The man in bed 8 talks regularly to the man in bed 9. There is a group of 3 in beds 20 through 22 who seem to know each other. Are they from the same factory, the same street, and who conduct low, continuous conversations about things you can't quite make out? Joe talks to you, or rather, Joe allows for the possibility of conversation in a way that is different from talking. He does not initiate, he responds. He asks a question occasionally, in the careful way of someone who genuinely wants to know the answer, and is not simply filling silence. What do you card, he asks on the morning of day 2. Coarse cotton mostly, sometimes the finer grades when they're backed up. Hard on the hands, that. You look at your hands, they are rough. Not as rough as Joe's, not the dye worker's roughness that goes all the way down to the bone, but rough in the specific way of someone who handles dry fibres all day, who inhales cotton dust from 6 in the morning to 8 in the evening, whose hands by Thursday are drier than they were on Monday. Is that how you got sick? Joe asks. Not the illness, he means the work. The connection between the work and the susceptibility. You think about this. The carding room is warm. The machinery generates heat. The cotton generates heat. 60 people in a room generate heat. And in the winter, it is sealed tight against the cold, which means the cotton dust and the exhalations of 60 people and the fine fibres that drift in the air, all of it accumulates. All of it settles on your lungs. Probably, you say. Joe nods. He doesn't say anything consoling. He doesn't say it gets better, or that you'll get used to it, or that many men work in the carding room for years without serious illness. These things might or might not be true, and Joe is not a man who says things he can't verify. 9. Dr. Cartwright and his round. The footsteps in the corridor, the door opening, the change in the ward's atmosphere. Not exactly fear, not exactly not fear. Something in between. The awareness of being assessed, of having your continued presence in this bed contingent on a decision being made by someone else based on criteria you don't fully understand. The round takes approximately 40 minutes for 30 occupied beds. This works out to roughly 80 seconds per patient when you subtract the time spent consulting with the student doctor between beds. You count once from the moment Dr. Cartwright reaches bed 13 to the moment he reaches bed 15. 4 minutes and 20 seconds. That is your allocation. That is the amount of time per day during which the direction of your treatment is actively considered by the person responsible for it. The rest of the time, you are managed by Mrs. Plum and her colleagues according to the plan already established. You receive what the plan says to receive. You eat what the plan says to eat. 4 minutes and 20 seconds. 10. The ward settles into its midday rhythm. The morning's procedures are done. Bloodlettings happen mid-morning. Dressing changes happen mid-morning. The purging draughts are administered mid-morning. Whatever the day is going to do to you, it has mostly done it by 10. This leaves the hours between 10 and midday as a kind of free time. Not comfortable free time. You're still sick, still feverish, still lying in a bed in a room with closed windows, but free in the sense that nothing is actively being done to you. Some people sleep, some people talk, some people stare at the ceiling with the focused attention of people who have recently been given a great deal to think about. The man in bed, 23, you never learn his name, he's gone by day 4 and you don't know whether he went home or somewhere else, passes this time making small, careful movements with his hands. His fingers trace patterns on the blanket, complicated patterns repeated with variations, some kind of counting or calculation, or just the hands needing to do something, because hands that have spent their whole lives working don't know what to do with stillness. You watch this for a while. Then you look at your own hands. They're resting on top of the blanket, just resting. The first time you try to count, the first time in 2 years they haven't been doing something. Working, washing, carrying, eating, something. You flex them slowly. Feel the joints resist slightly. Fever stiffness, or just the stiffness of hands that haven't been used. The knuckles crack one by one. Joe watches this from bed 15. Miss it? He asks. The work? Yes. You think about it honestly. The carding room, the noise, the dust, the specific smell of raw cotton, which is not unpleasant. A dry, slightly sweet smell that is one of the things you've adjusted to in 2 years, so that now it smells like your work rather than smelling like anything in particular. I miss having something to do, you say. Joe nods. That's the hardest part, the lying still. I told Martha. 2 weeks I've been lying still. 2 weeks. I've never lain still for 2 weeks in my life since I was a baby. She comes Tuesday and Thursday? Tuesday and Thursday. His face, which is generally set in the expression of a man who has made his peace with things, does something briefly different when he mentions Martha. Not softens exactly. The word is too vague. More like it sharpens, but in a warm direction. The way a fire sharpens when someone adds fuel to it. She'll want me home and back to work the minute I walk through the door. A pause. She's not wrong. Does she know about the... You gesture vaguely at the bowl. The gruel? Yes. She knows what these places are like. She's not surprised. He looks at the ceiling. When she comes Thursday, she'll bring bread. Proper bread. I think she puts cheese in it sometimes, though she'll never admit to it because of the rules. Mrs. Plum looks the other way on Thursdays. I think she has her own bread in her coat half the time. A brief dry sound that might be Joe's version of a laugh. Not stupid, Mrs. Plum. She knows what 4p a day buys. At noon, a different kitchen girl brings a different pot. Different in the sense that it is the same pot, but smaller. And what it contains is, technically, not the gruel. It is described in the institutional menu that exists somewhere in an office on the ground floor as bread and broth. The broth is hot water with something added to it that was once related to meat in a causal sense. Perhaps bones were used. Perhaps the water was poured over a surface on which meat had at some earlier time been present. The exact provenance of the flavour, such as it is something you eventually stop trying to trace. The bread is better. The bread is real bread. Coarse, dense, not fresh, but bread. Actual bread. You can hold it in your hand and feel the weight of it, the specific resistance of something that has structure, that was made by someone with yeast and flour and the intention of producing something edible. You eat the bread carefully, slowly, the way you have learned to eat anything that is actually good, making it last. The broth you drink, not sip. There is no sipping in a ward like this, no pretension to the ceremony of eating. You lift the bowl, same tin bowl as the gruel, and you drink it, and the warmth goes down, and you are briefly, simply glad of the warmth. Then the bread is gone, and the broth is gone, and there are 5 hours until supper. Joe has been in the ward for 2 weeks before you arrive. This means Joe has a level of institutional knowledge that is the specific knowledge of someone who has had nothing to do but observe. He knows which bed gets the least draught from the corridor door. It's bed 11, slightly behind the angle of the door's swing. He knows that the nurse who comes on Thursday evenings will, if you ask politely and she's in a reasonable mood, change your blanket for one that's been aired, which makes a significant difference to the smell situation. He knows that Dr. Cartwright does his rounds clockwise from the door, which means beds on the right side of the ward, your side, his side, get seen first when Cartwright is in a hurry, and last when he's being thorough. He knows that the gruel tastes slightly better on Mondays. You ask him why. Because Edward Sumner buys his vegetables on Saturday market day, Joe says, and Saturday market turnips sit in a cellar over Sunday and get delivered Monday morning. They haven't had as long to... He pauses, chooses a word. Develop. You think about this. You figured this out while you were lying here? I've had time. And the rest of the week? Wednesday's worst, he says simply. Don't think about Wednesday. It is currently Tuesday. You make a mental note about Wednesday. Joe also knows the names and basic situations of everyone in the ward, having observed 2 weeks of doctor's rounds and conversations and family visits. He relays this information without apparent judgment, not gossip exactly, more like the briefings of someone who considers the social geography of the ward to be useful information, the way a captain knows the terrain. Bed 8. The labourer with the leg, name's Richards, William Richards, 60 years old, Salford. The leg started with a cut that went wrong and has been deteriorating for weeks. Joe doesn't say what he thinks the outcome is. His tone says it. Bed 12. Before it became the cholera bed, and then the broken leg woman's bed. A young man from Hume, cotton spinner, came in with what looked like typhoid, was moved to the fever ward on day 10. Joe doesn't know what happened after that. Bed 3. A woman, rare in this ward which skews heavily male. Her name is Agnes Booth. She's 38. She was a laundress who developed a severe inflammation of her hands and arms. The hands are bandaged. She speaks quietly, in the way of someone managing pain that she has decided to manage privately. She never complains, Joe says. Not once since I've been here. To anyone? Not within earshot. And these beds are close enough together that if she complained to herself, I'd hear it. You look at bed 3. Agnes Booth is awake, looking at the window, the high, closed window through which the March sky is visible as a rectangle of pale grey light. There is something in the way she looks at it, the quality of the looking that is difficult to describe. Not longing exactly, not distress. More like a conversation she's having with the outside from a distance. A reminder to herself that the outside exists, that the rectangle of grey is real sky, that the world beyond the ward is continuing. On the morning of day 3, Dr. Cartwright brings a different entourage. Usually it is the same faces. The junior doctor, a couple of medical men whose roles in the hierarchy you haven't quite sorted out. But on day 3 there is someone new, a young man, younger than you would expect a doctor to be, 20, maybe 21, with the look of someone who has recently arrived from somewhere that has not yet been entirely replaced by somewhere else. There is still something rural about him, something about the way he stands, slightly too straight, the way you stand when you're trying not to look like where you came from. He watches the round with the attention of someone who is memorizing everything, not just the medicine, the choreography, the way Dr. Cartwright approaches each bed, the way he holds the wrist for the pulse, the way he phrases his questions, short, precise, requiring specific answers, cutting off anything that begins to expand beyond the specific. At your bed, the student doctor stands slightly behind Cartwright and watches. After Cartwright moves on, the student stays a moment, just a moment. He looks at you with an expression that is different from Cartwright's. Not more compassionate, exactly. That might be reading too much in, but more present, more there. "How long have you been in the carding room?" he asks. It is not a question Dr. Cartwright asked. It is not a question on any diagnostic checklist. It is a question someone asks when they are curious about a person. 2 years, you say. He nods, makes a small note in his own notebook, separate from the official case notes, a smaller book, worn at the corners. "The dust gets into the lungs," he says. Not to you exactly. More to himself, to his notebook. A thought in the process of becoming. "Yes," you say. He looks at you one more time, and then he follows Dr. Cartwright to bed 15. His name, you learn this from a later conversation with Joe, who learns it from Mrs. Plum, is James Alderton. He is from a village in Derbyshire. He is studying medicine at the Manchester School of Medicine on Bridge Street. He is on his clinical rotation. In 40 years, James Alderton will be one of the doctors who helps establish the link between industrial cotton dust and lung disease. He will publish a paper on occupational respiratory illness that is considered a foundational document in occupational medicine. The paper will cite cases he observed during his clinical rotations in 1832, described with a specificity that speaks of a young man who was paying close attention. You don't know this. You're just lying in bed 14 with the fever, watching him take notes in his worn notebook. But something about the way he asked the question, "How long have you been in the carding room?" stays with you, someone asked. Someone wanted to know. It is not nothing. Joe was right about Wednesday. The gruel arrives at 6 on Wednesday evening, and it is the same grey colour, the same consistency, but there is something about the smell that is marginally more insistent. Not dramatically, not in a way you could point to and say with certainty, "This is wrong." More like the smell you noticed on the staircase, present now in the bowl, hovering at the edge of awareness rather than safely beneath it. You eat it looking at the window. Agnes Booth in bed, 3 beds across from you, eats hers without looking at anything, eyes down, eating methodically, efficiently, in the way of someone who has decided that looking makes it worse, and has chosen not to look. The man in bed 8, Richards, the one with the leg, doesn't eat his. He holds the bowl, looks at it, sets it on the cabinet beside the bed. Mrs. Plum notices on her evening pass, "Richards, eat. Not hungry. Eat anyway." "Can't." He says it simply. Not a refusal exactly, more like a statement of fact. "The smell of it today." "I know." Mrs. Plum says this quietly. It is not agreement or acknowledgement exactly. It is something else. the particular way a person speaks when they've known something for a long time and cannot do anything about it. Eat what you can, he eats about half. Mrs. Plum collects the bowl without comment. You watch this exchange from bed 14. You have eaten your whole bowl. You're still eating your whole bowl at this point because the hunger is strong enough to override the smell. But you've noted carefully the hierarchy of what's available. Your bowl versus Richards's half-eaten bowl. Mrs. Plum's quiet, I know. The fact that she knows, and the supper comes anyway. That night you have a dream, or perhaps a fever vision, the line is unclear at this stage, in which you are standing in the kitchen of the infirmary, watching the turnips being tipped from a sack into the pot. The kitchen is low-ceilinged and hot, lit by the fire and the cook. A big woman, nothing like the man whose voice you heard on the staircase, but a woman in the dream, is adding things to the pot without looking at them, her hands moving automatically the way your hands move in the carding room, automatically, without investigation, the turnips going in one by one. Some of them are fine, some of them are not fine. The pot receives them without distinction. You wake to the ward's coughing at some hour between midnight and dawn, and you lie there for a while with the ceiling above you, and the rough blanket and the cold at your feet, and the smell of the ward, and you think the pot receives them without distinction. That is the sentence that stays with you. Long after the dream fades, long after you leave the ward, long after your legs get strong again, and your hands go back to the carding room, and your coat hangs on its hook at Mrs. Hartley's, the pot receives them without distinction. Because who is going to say anything? Who has the standing in 1832 Manchester to walk into the infirmary's kitchen and say, "That turnip is not suitable for human consumption"? The charity patients don't have access to the kitchen. The nurses are employed by the institution. The doctors eat elsewhere. The contractors are accountable to the institution, and the institution's interest is in keeping the cost per patient below the budget, so the annual report looks good. There is no one in the chain who has both the knowledge and the power to change it, and so the pot receives them without distinction, and the heat takes care of it, and at 6 o'clock the kitchen girl carries the pot up the stairs, and 40 sick people eat from tin bowls with tin spoons and try to get better. Between 2 and 4 on Thursdays the ward has visiting hours. This is, without question, the best 2 hours of the week. You don't have a visitor on your first Thursday. You've only been in for 2 days, and Mrs. Hartley is not the visiting type, and there is no one else in Manchester who would come. Your mother in Cheshire is 3 hours by coach and doesn't know you're here. The overseer at the mill knows but does not come. He is a decent man, but not that kind of decent. So you lie in bed 14 and watch other people have visitors. It is not a bad experience watching other people have visitors. It has its own specific texture. Martha arrives for Joe at 2:05, punctual in the way of someone who counts the hours and had been counting them since Tuesday. She's a small woman, compact, with grey-brown hair pulled back under a good bonnet. She sits down on the chair that has been placed beside bed 15 and takes Joe's hand in both of hers, and they look at each other for a moment without speaking. The looking. It is not dramatic. There is no audible relief, no breakdown of composure. But the quality of looking. Two people who have spent 40-something years together, looking at each other after a separation, after a time of uncertainty. It has weight. It displaces air. "You look better," Martha says. "I feel better," Joe says. A pause. "Mostly." "What does the doctor say?" "That I'm progressing satisfactorily." Martha's face does a small, controlled thing that says she has heard institutional language before and knows what to do with it. And the food? The usual. A pause. Did you bring... Martha is already reaching into her coat. The bread is wrapped in cloth. Martha passes it with the practiced ease of someone executing a manoeuvre they have rehearsed, and Joe receives it with equal practice, and it disappears beneath the blanket in the time it would take you to blink. Mrs. Plum, passing the end of the bed, does not look toward bed 15. Agnes Booth in bed 3 has no visitor today. She has, as far as you can tell, never had a visitor. She lies with her bandaged hands resting on the blanket and watches the ward with the expression of someone who has made a long and careful peace with solitude, not cheerfully, not with bitterness, but with the settled quality of a decision that has been made and is being kept. Billy in bed 7 has his mother. She arrives at 2:15, slightly breathless, in the coat that is her second best coat. Her best is for Sunday. She's carrying something in a basket that she holds in front of her with the defensive confidence of a woman who has decided she's bringing food to her injured son, and she will carry it past any nurse in England to do so. Mrs. Plum, impressively, manages to look at the opposite wall for the entire time Billy's mother is at the basket. Billy eats with his left hand. His mother holds his right arm, the bandaged one, very gently, as if she's cradling something fragile and irreplaceable. Which she is, of course. Which she is. She doesn't look at the bandaged wrist. Or rather, she looks at it constantly, in the way of someone trying not to look at something. Her eyes keep going there and then moving away. Going and moving away. Billy notices. It doesn't hurt much now, he says. She nods. She doesn't trust herself to speak for a moment. The doctor says I'll be right enough, Billy continues, with the specific kindness of a 14-year-old boy trying to make his mother feel better. Left hand works fine. I'll manage. Of course you will, she says. Then, quietly, in a voice so low you almost don't catch it, we'll manage. The visiting hours end at 4. The visitors leave. The ward closes back over itself, sealing the 2 hours away like a thing that happened in a different place. The evening gruel arrives at 6. On day 6, the day the fever breaks, there is an incident with the windows. It is not a large incident. In the scale of things that happen in hospital wards it barely registers, but you're there for it, and you remember it. One of the high windows on the east side of the ward has a latch that has been wearing down for some time. The wood of the frame has contracted slightly with the cold and damp, and the latch, which was never very secure, has been getting looser with each contraction. On the morning of day 6, the window opens, not dramatically, not a bang, not a crash, just a quiet swing. The latch finally giving up its last resistance, and the window moving outward 6 inches on its hinge, letting in a slice of the March morning. The air that comes through that 6-inch gap is extraordinary. You feel it across the ward. You're close enough to the window to feel it as a movement. Cold, sharp, carrying the smell of the outside. Not the country, not clean meadow air, obviously. This is Manchester, and even the outside air in Manchester in 1832 carries coal smoke and the smell of the River Irwell. But it is moving air, air from outside the building, air that has not been breathed by 40 sick people. The effect on the ward is immediate and strange. People who have been lying still or sleeping start to move. Heads turn toward the window. There is a collective orientation toward the source of fresh air, like plants turning toward light. Agnes Booth in bed 3 closes her eyes and breathes in. Joe tilts his head toward the window and says quietly, To no one in particular. There it is. The young man in bed 20, who has been restless all morning, goes still. This lasts for perhaps 15 minutes. Then Mrs. Plum comes in for the morning round and sees the window. She crosses the ward with purpose, reaches the window, looks at it for a moment, the frame, the latch, the 6-inch gap admitting the cold March air. She closes it. She does not do this with irritation or with any visible emotion. She closes it the way you would close a window in a house you are responsible for, because the rules of the house say windows should be closed, and the rules are not her rules, but they are the rules she operates within. The latch is too loose to hold any more. She holds it with her hand while she looks around, then finds a piece of folded cloth on the windowsill, someone's handkerchief probably, left there for some other purpose, and uses it to wedge the latch shut. The window stays closed. The ward air closes back over itself. Thick, warm, stationary. Agnes Booth opens her eyes. Joe is quiet for a while. You lie in bed 14 and breathe through your mouth and think about the 15 minutes. Nobody wants to talk about bed 12 after the cholera patient is moved, not because it is haunted. Nobody in the ward, as far as you can tell, believes in haunting in the conventional sense. But bed 12 has a kind of status now, an association. The sheets have been changed, the mattress turned. The broken leg woman sleeps in it without apparent concern because she arrived after and doesn't know what was there before. But the people who were there, you, Joe, Richards in bed 8, the few others who have been in long enough to have seen it happen, there is a collective awareness of bed 12 that is different from the awareness of other beds. Richards talks about it on day 5, late afternoon, when the ward is quiet and the light through the windows is turning the particular orange of late afternoon in winter. Saw 3 come through here, he says. He means cholera cases. He has been here long enough to have seen 3 separate patients arrive, occupy a bed, and be moved to the fever ward. Or not moved. He doesn't specify for 2 of the 3 which direction they went. How do they know, you ask? How do the doctors decide it's the look of them, Richard says, the blue, the way the skin goes, and the other thing? He pauses, decides not to elaborate on the other thing. You can tell, even from across the room, by day 2 you can tell. The man in bed 12, you say. He looked young, Richard says. That's the thing about it. Young ones, strong ones. It takes them fast, sometimes faster than old ones. He looks at his own hands. The labourer's hands, broad and battered, resting on the blanket. I've been working since I was 8 years old, strong enough to break a brick with my fist when I was 30, and here I am with a bad leg. While that young man, he stops. We don't know what happened to him, Joe says quietly, from bed 15. He might be fine. He might, Richard says. The ward holds this possibility. The maybe fine young man from bed 12, in the fever ward, in the care of whatever the fever ward has to offer, which is, you don't know, but you suspect it is not dramatically better than what you've been receiving. The Board of Health has set up emergency cholera wards in various buildings around Manchester. Converted workhouses mostly, empty factory buildings, places that can be made into wards quickly, which means beds or approximations of beds. Medical staff, or what passes for medical staff when demand outpaces supply, and food. You don't want to think about the food in the emergency cholera wards. You don't want to think about the food contractor for the emergency cholera wards. You eat your Wednesday gruel and think about something else. The conversation about the Anatomy Act happens properly on day 7. Day 7, you are better enough to be genuinely present in the conversation. The fever is down, the bleeding has stopped, the purging draughts have been discontinued. You are weak but alert. Richard starts it. He has heard something from a visitor, a man from his street who came on Thursday about the parliamentary debate. They're going to pass it, Richard says. My Ned heard it from a man who has a cousin who works at the town hall. Not this month, but before summer. Joe already knows about this. He knows everything that happens in the ward. They've been debating it for years, he says. Warburton's been pushing it since 28. Who's Warburton, you ask? MP? Puts himself forward as a reformer. The tone in Joe's voice for that last word would strip paint. His reform is, instead of giving the anatomists the bodies of criminals, give them the bodies of paupers who die in workhouses and hospitals. Because there aren't enough criminals, Richard says. Not enough people getting hanged to keep the anatomy school supplied. So they'll use us instead. Silence. There are 3 of you in this conversation, all in the charity ward, all in beds that exist because they can't afford anything else, all in receipt of the institutional gruel and the institutional medicine. They have to give you time to be claimed, Joe says. That's what they're proposing. 48 hours. If someone claims the body within 48 hours, the surgeons don't get it. 48 hours, Richard says, for a working man from Salford, in winter. Joe's voice is completely, carefully neutral. Get word to the family. Family gets transport. Family arrives. All in 48 hours. You think about your own situation. Mother in Cheshire. 3 hours by coach, and that's assuming someone has sent word and someone has to pay for the coach. Does the hospital send word, you ask? To who? Joe says. The answer hangs in the air. If you are in the charity ward of the Manchester Infirmary, you are here because you have no money for anything else. You are here on the basis of your parish settlement. You may have family who would come for you, who would want to come for you, who would be devastated by the alternative. But the system does not have a process for finding them. The system has a process for filling out a certificate and waiting 48 hours. Martha would be here, Joe says, and his voice changes when he says this, becomes quieter, becomes the voice of a man who has decided what he trusts and where that trust is located. She visits Tuesday and Thursday. If she came and I was, she'd know what to do. Richard says. He doesn't say the same for himself. He just says I and looks at the ceiling. Agnes Booth in bed 3 has been listening to this entire conversation. When the silence extends long enough, she says, without turning her head, I have a sister in Didsbury. She'd come. Nobody asks how long it would take. Nobody asks whether someone would think to tell her. Nobody asks about coaches. Good, says Joe. That's good. And that is the end of the conversation about the Anatomy Act. On day 7, when you're well enough to walk the ward, actually walk it, not just the staircase. You discover something. You discover the door at the far end of the ward corridor. The door that is always closed. You don't open it. You stand near it for a moment, listening. You can hear from behind it the sounds of a different kind of place, quieter, the occasional voice at a normal speaking volume, rather than the careful low tones of the charity ward. The sound of a fire, actual fire crackling in a grate. There is no fireplace in your ward. The smell, even from this distance, is different. Not clean, exactly. Hospitals of 1832 do not smell clean. but the specific quality of the sickness smell is different, attenuated somehow, fresher, as if ventilated more regularly. You stand at that door for perhaps 30 seconds, then you walk back. You don't open the door. Not because you're forbidden to, no one has explicitly told you that door is off limits, but because you understand without being told that the information behind that door is of the type that makes you feel worse without giving you anything to do about it. You already know the private ward patients eat better. Joe has told you about the beef tea. You already know the doctors spend more time there. You already know the fire is lit. You walk back to bed 14. You sit on the edge of the mattress. You feel the straw compress under your weight, finding the grooves that are yours now, the specific depressions shaped by your specific body. Joe watches you from bed 15. South side of the building, he says. 12 beds. Private rooms for the serious cases. I know. Same building, he says. Same doctors. I know, he nods. Thought you should know you knew. You lie back. The ceiling. The high closed windows. The particular afternoon quality of light in a Manchester March. The pale, thin light of a sky that wants to be something but hasn't committed. You have been in this bed for 7 days. You have eaten 14 bowls of the grey gruel, 7 portions of the bread and broth, 7 morning gruels. You have been bled twice. You have been purged 3 times with draughts that remove from your body things that your body, frankly, needed. You have survived this, not because of it, despite it. Despite the 4 pence per day and the closed windows and the contractor buying his turnips at a discount from the market traders who couldn't sell them to anyone with options. You lie there and breathe and think about the crackling fire behind the closed door, and you decide something quietly without much ceremony. You decide that you will not be in this bed again. Not this specific bed. Any bed like this. Any situation where your health is managed at 4 pence per day by someone who has a financial interest in managing it cheaply. You don't know yet how you avoid this. You don't have money for the private ward. You won't have money for the private ward for a long time, possibly ever, but you decide it anyway. The way you decide things when you're lying somewhere you don't want to be, with the kind of decision that's more animal than rational, more a statement of intent toward the universe than a plan. Not again. Joe is watching you. Better, he says. Getting there, you say. The morning of your discharge, day 9, you wake before the bell. The ward is still in its nighttime state, the breathing layered and deep, a single candle somewhere down the corridor making a thin line of light under the door. You lie very still and do an inventory. Feet, cold, as always, but no worse than a person would expect on a cold morning. Not the cold of illness, just the cold of a room in March. Hands, resting on the blanket. You flex them slowly. They work. The joints still slightly stiff, but fundamentally functional, responding to instruction. Chest. You breathe in deliberately, as deep as you can. Something resists. Not the full resistance of the fever's worst days, but a slight weight. A reminder that the lungs are dealing with something, not gone, but diminished. Head clear. This is the most striking thing. For 9 days your head has had the quality of something wrapped in wet cloth, muffled, heavy, thinking through resistance. Now, lying here in the dark ward, your thoughts arrive cleanly, one at a time, in order. You're going to be discharged today. You're going to put on your coat. You're going to walk out into the March morning. You're going to be cold and weak and probably hungry within the hour, and you're going to need to sit down more than once on the walk back. but you're going to walk back. This seems like a lot. The bell rings at 6:30. The ward begins its cascade waking. Mrs. Plum arrives. She checks you, pulse, tongue, eyes, with the same efficiency as always. But there is something slightly different in the way she looks at you. Not warmer, but different. The way a person looks at something that is leaving, as opposed to something that is staying. Dr. Cartwright will certify you this morning, she says. Be ready at 9. I'm ready now, you say. Something passes across her face. Not a smile, nothing as definite as that, but something adjacent. 9, she says, and moves on. At 8, the morning gruel arrives for the last time. You eat it. You eat it slowly, deliberately, paying attention. The way you've learned to eat things you may not have again, marking the experience properly. The grey, the soft things, the tin spoon and the tin bowl, and the particular temperature of something that was hot 20 minutes ago and is now approaching room temperature. You eat the whole bowl. Joe watches you. Last one? He asks. Last one, you confirm. A silence. Joe is going home himself tomorrow. 2 more days, he'd said, and those 2 days end tomorrow. Martha's coming tomorrow, he says. She'll walk back with me. That's good. It's good. He looks at his hands, the blue-stained hands, the dye-works hands. Turns them over once. I'm going to sit by the fire for 3 days, he says. Just sit there. Drink tea. Martha makes a good tea. A pause. Then back to work. You nod. You'll be all right, he says. Not a question. It is the kind of statement that contains within it a decision. Joe's decision, made after 9 days of observation, about who you are and what you're likely to do. I'll be all right, you say. At 9, Dr. Cartwright certifies you. At 9:30, you're standing in the entrance hall with the clerk's counter between you and the man who is retrieving your coat. Ticket 847. The coat comes out. You put it on. It fits. Of course it fits. It is your coat and you've not changed that much physically. You are thinner, probably, and the weakness makes the coat feel slightly heavier than usual on your shoulders. But it is familiar. It knows you. You button it. You fold the discharge certificate and put it in the pocket. You push the front door open. The cold hits you like something that has been waiting. Not cruel cold, March cold, which has spring somewhere behind it, which is cold but not the cold of January, which has directional intent rather than just ambient hostility, but real cold, cold that moves, that has come from somewhere and is going somewhere. You stand on the steps and breathe it. Coal smoke, the particular smell of the river a quarter-mile south, horse manure from the road below. The smell of bread from somewhere nearby, a bakery maybe, which makes your stomach say something very direct and specific about what it needs. Above all of this, the movement, the air moves. It comes from the west slightly, and it moves across your face and through your hair, and it is the most straightforwardly good thing you have experienced in 9 days. You stand there for longer than is strictly necessary. Then you walk. Piccadilly's doing its morning business. Carts, carriages, a coal merchant's wagon so heavily loaded that the horse's hooves are slipping slightly on the cobbles. Vendors setting up. A woman selling hot chestnuts from a brazier. You smell them from 20 feet away and something animal happens in your stomach. You stop. Count your money. You have 3p left. Everything else went in storage. Or rather, your coat was the only thing that went into storage, and you didn't have much to begin with. 3p. The chestnuts are a halfpenny for 6. You buy 6. You eat them standing on the pavement, holding them in your palms, still hot from the brazier, the shells charred and brittle, cracking under the pressure of your thumbs. The meat inside is soft and sweet and hot and real. You eat all 6 and you think about nothing while you eat them except the hot sweetness and the cold air and the sound of Manchester getting on with its morning. Then you walk home. 3 days later, you stand in the carding room. The mill smell comes back to you like something that was always yours. Not pleasant. Nobody would call cotton dust and machine oil and the concentrated warmth of 60 people's bodies in an enclosed room pleasant, but familiar. Specific in a way that speaks of 2 years of belonging to a place, even a place that doesn't especially want you to belong to it. The machinery runs. The noise is what it always is. Comprehensive, surrounding. The kind of noise that doesn't leave room for thought of the ordinary kind. After 9 days in the ward, where the loudest sounds were the coughing and the church bells, the noise of the mill is something to navigate. Your hands find the work. This is the thing about bodies. They remember what minds sometimes have to consciously recall. Your hands have been doing this for 2 years. They know the motions, the feed, the draw, the check, the adjustment. They fall back into the rhythm without consultation. But something is different. You notice the dust. You've always known the dust is there. You've breathed it for 2 years. You've seen it settle on every surface in the room. The machinery, the floorboards, the shoulders and hair of the person working beside you. But you've stopped seeing it the way you stop seeing anything that is constantly present. Now, after 9 days in a room where the dominant smell was illness and carbolic, you see the dust again, the way it drifts in the light from the high windows, the way it accumulates in the corners, the way it enters your lungs with each breath, the same as always, and your lungs, slightly compromised, slightly worn from the fever, slightly aware of themselves in a way they weren't before, receive it with something that might, if you pay attention, be a small protest. You breathe it, and you think of James Alderton, the medical student from Derbyshire, writing in his small worn notebook. How long have you been in the carding room? 2 years. The dust gets into the lungs. You breathe in. You breathe out. You keep working. The overseer Hargreaves walks the floor at midday, pauses near you, assesses you, the efficiency of a man who needs to know if the worker he has returned is a worker or a liability. All right, he says. Fine, you say. He nods, moves on. Fine. You are fine. By the standards available to a 23-year-old cotton carder in Manchester in March of 1832, you are fine. You've survived a fever. You've survived the treatment of the fever, which in some ways required more surviving than the fever itself. You have eaten 14 bowls of institutional gruel and you have lived. Your hands move. The cotton moves. The dust moves. The afternoon bell rings. There are things you carry out of the ward that you did not carry in. Not physical things. The coat is the same coat. The discharge certificate will be lost within a month. The ticket number 847 is already fading from memory. But other things. You carry the specific smell. Not always present, not always triggering. But it is there, filed under available, the way certain memories make themselves accessible when a particular combination of smell and temperature and context calls them up. Grey gruel and carbolic and old wool blankets and the undersmell of 40 people in a sealed room. It will come back to you at intervals for the rest of your life. You carry the sound of someone coughing blood in a tin cup in the dark. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the sound and the silence after, and the particular quality of the ward holding that silence before the breathing resumed. You carry Billy. You don't know what happened to Billy, whether he went home, whether the hand healed well enough, whether his mother's will manage became something true, or something that got harder as the years went on. You don't know what a 14-year-old boy with one hand does in Manchester in 1832. The mills won't have him, or not in the same capacity. The option's narrow. You carry him anyway. You carry the knowledge of what the heat takes care of. Not anger, exactly, not bitterness. Those require a certainty about what should have been different, and that certainty requires a comparison to something better, and in 1832 Manchester there isn't, for most people, a better to compare to. But knowledge. The specific, particular knowledge of what the annual report says and what the bowl contains. The gap between the language of institutions and the reality of what the people inside them experience. Generous and nutritious, grey turnip gruel, soft at the edges, the heat takes care of it. This knowledge doesn't go away. Manchester in April looks like Manchester in March, except the mud dries slightly, and the light lasts slightly longer, and occasionally there is a day, not often, not reliably, but occasionally, where the sky above the mills clears to something that might generously be called blue. On one of these days, you take a different route home from the mill. Not intentional at first. Your feet just choose differently, the way feet do when they've been taking the same route for long enough that deviating feels almost involuntary. The route takes you past the infirmary. You stop on the opposite side of Piccadilly and look at it. It is a large building, well built by the standards of 1832, stone, substantial, the kind of architecture that means to communicate permanence and civic virtue. The entrance is the same entrance. The door is the same door. People are going in and coming out. People who look like you, working people, people in second-best coats, people who've been managing something on their own until they couldn't. The building receives them. You stand and watch it for a while. You're not sure what you feel looking at it. It is not simple. It is not this place harmed me, and it is not this place saved me. It is something more complicated than either, something that has both of those things in it simultaneously. The building is real. The people going in are real. The charity that funds it is real, imperfect, self-serving, conditioned by the assumptions of the people who give it, but real. Edward Sumner and his discount turnips and the heat taking care of it are also real. Mrs. Plum looking away on Thursday afternoons when Martha passes bread beneath a blanket is real. Dr. Cartwright and his 4 minutes and 20 seconds and his genuine belief that he is helping is real. James Alderton and his notebook and his question, "How long have you been in the carding room?" is real. Billy's mother holding his wrist is real. Joe going home to sit by the fire and drink Martha's tea is real. All of it real. All of it happening in the same building at the same time, with the same people and the same gruel and the same closed windows and the same thin blanket that doesn't quite reach. You look at it for a while longer. Then you turn and walk home. The cholera epidemic of 1832 killed approximately 600 people in Manchester before it subsided. The Manchester Infirmary expanded its fever wards. The Board of Health issued more notices. The newspapers argued about miasma and the poor and the state of the water supply and the adequacy of the institutional response. Parliament passed the Anatomy Act in August. The body snatchers went out of business. The pauper dead went to the medical schools. Parliament passed the Poor Law Amendment Act in 1834. The workhouses were reformed, which is to say that the system of managing the poor was systematized and in many ways made worse, under the assumption that poverty was a moral failing and the conditions of relief should be sufficiently unpleasant to discourage dependence. The gruel got worse in the workhouses, better documented possibly, more consistently grey. The Manchester Infirmary became the Manchester Royal Infirmary in 1830. You were treated in a Royal Infirmary, which is an irony you don't dwell on. The windows stayed closed for another 20 years. The germ theory didn't arrive until the 1860s, and the miasma theory died hard, as wrong theories tend to do when they have institutional investment and professional reputation wrapped around them. In 1842, a man named Edwin Chadwick published a report on the sanitary conditions of the labouring population of Great Britain. It was not a comfortable document. It described in exhaustive and damning detail the state of working-class housing, water supply, sewage systems, and health. It made the argument, radical for its time, that the conditions of the poor were not the result of moral deficiency, but of physical environment, and that improving the environment would improve the health. This argument did not immediately win. Arguments that require institutional change never immediately win. But it began. And then Snow and his water pump in 1849, and Nightingale and her lamp in 1854, and Lister and his carbolic acid in 1865, and one by one, piece by piece, the accumulated wrong assumptions of 1832 medicine got identified and replaced. The windows got opened, the hands got washed, the gruel got better, not immediately, not evenly, not without resistance from every level of the system that benefited from it being grey, but eventually. Come back to yourself now, not to the ward, not to Manchester in 1832, to wherever you are right now, in the warmth and the dark and the end of a day that is behind you. You've been in the ward, you've eaten the gruel, you've lain in bed 14 and listened to 40 people breathe and heard the church bells through closed windows and watched Joe go home to Martha. You've survived it, and now the surviving is done for tonight. There is nothing left of this day that requires you. Everything that needed doing was done or wasn't done, and either way it's behind you now, sealed off, in the past where it belongs. Your body knows this. Your body is waiting quietly for permission. Let it have its rest. These sounds around you are not the sounds of the ward. They are your sounds, whatever is around you, the particular quiet of your particular place. The specific way silence sounds where you are, not the silence of a room with 40 people in it, that layered, breathing, coughing, not silence. Your own. This is yours. You breathe in and the air moves freely. The windows, wherever you are, can be opened. The air is clean enough. Not Manchester 1832 clean. Not the grey quality of coal smoke air filtered through institutional walls, but clean enough, moving. You breathe it, and it is good. Think about your hands. They're resting, not working, not gripping a tin spoon or gripping the banister of an institutional staircase, or gripping the side of a bed in the dark, trying to work out which direction up is. Just resting. Feel the weight of them. This is what hands feel like when nothing is required of them. Heavy, warm, slightly more present than usual, the way things become more present when you pay attention. Let that weight settle. Let the hands be what they are. Resting things. Warm things. Things that will work tomorrow and don't need to work right now. Your legs. Not the legs of a man 9 days into a fever who stands in the entrance hall of the Manchester Infirmary and tries not to show that standing is an effort. Not the legs that carry you down Piccadilly in the cold March morning, stopping twice, once at the corner and once at the cart with the horse who has given up. Your legs, right now, wherever they are, heavy, spent, finished with the day, let them go. The chest. Breathe in once, deliberately. Feel the lungs expand, not the restricted expansion of the feverish lung, not the careful, conscious breath of someone who's aware of cotton dust accumulating, not the breath of a ward with closed windows. A full breath, and then release. The day goes with it. All of it. The gruel and the tin spoon and the 4 minutes and 20 seconds and the latch that finally gave way and the 15 minutes of moving air and then the handkerchief wedged in the frame. Release it. You're warm enough now. You are warm enough. Not the institutional warmth of 40 bodies in a sealed room, that particular, slightly wrong warmth of something that should be ventilated and isn't. This is your own warmth. The warmth of a body at rest under covers at the end of a day. You've earned this. Not the way you earn things at work, not exchange for labour, not granted by an overseer, not contingent on being productive enough and present enough and sufficiently not sick. Just earned in the way that getting through a day earns you the night after it. You've been through today. Tonight is yours. The sounds are slowing now. Not gone. You're still aware of them. But they're moving to the edges. The particular sound of wherever you are at night, the building settling, the outside quieting. Whatever your version of the church bells is, a distant sound marking intervals, telling the hours in the dark without asking anything of you. One sound, then the silence after. Just the silence after. There's a quality that comes in the last minutes before sleep. A specific quality of the mind when it is finally willing to let go of its grip. Not the tired quality of the early evening. This is later and deeper than that. This is the quality of a mind that has finished with the day in a real way, not just a provisional way. The thoughts that remain are slow. They move through heavy air. They don't demand anything. They're just there, drifting. The coat on the hook. Martha's tea. The rectangle of grey sky through the closed window. Agnes Booth's eyes closing when the window opened. You are Thomas Baxter, and you are not Thomas Baxter. You are in Manchester in 1832. And you're not in Manchester in 1832. You're in a charity ward eating grey gruel from a tin bowl, and you're exactly where you are, warm and still, at the end of a day that belongs to a different century entirely. Both things are true. The body that lies in bed 14, and the body that lies where you are now, they're different bodies, separated by nearly 200 years of medicine and sanitation, and germ theory and opened windows. But they're both tired. They're both at the end of something. They're both ready for the dark to do what the dark does, to receive a person quietly, without judgment, without diagnosis, without a 4-minute assessment and a note in a ledger. Just receive. Just hold. Just let the day go quiet, and the breathing slow and the sleep come. Centuries have passed since the ward. The building is gone or changed or repurposed. Manchester rebuilt itself, as it always does, with the restless energy of a city that can't sit still. The ward is gone. The tin bowls are gone. The contractor and his discount turnips and the heat that takes care of it, gone. The closed windows are open, have been open for a long time. The hands that hold the instruments are washed now, have been washed for more than 100 years. The germ theory is not a theory anymore. It is what medicine is built on. The gruel, the specific institutional 4 pence per day grey turnip gruel, that particular gruel is gone. But people are still getting sick. People are still walking through hospital doors with that particular vulnerability, that specific quality of needing help and hoping the help is real. Still lying in beds, listening to a building sounds at night, still thinking about home, still counting the hours to morning. Some things don't change. The human need to be cared for, really cared for, with actual food and actual clean air and actual attention, that doesn't change. The gap between what institutions say they provide and what they actually provide, that takes work to close, and the work is never fully done. The notebook and the question. How long have you been in the carding room? The willingness to ask and to listen and to write it down and do something with the answer, that work is never done either. But tonight, that work is not yours to do. Tonight, the work is done. Tonight, there is only this. The dark is good. Let it be what it is. Let the breathing slow to the pace the body chooses when no one is asking anything of it. Let the thoughts thin out. Let the last one go. Whatever it is, the last thought of the day, the one that comes just before sleep takes over. Let it come and let it pass and let it go. You're here. That's enough. That's more than enough. More than was ever required of anyone. Sleep now. Let it take you the way the fever breaks. Not all at once. Not with drama. But with the slow certainty of something that has always been coming. The long drift. The pleasant downward movement of a mind finally willing to stop holding itself up. You're warm enough. You're safe enough. You're here. The bells in the distance marking the hour. You don't need to count them. You don't need to count anything. Just the dark. Just the breath. Just the long, slow slide into the place where none of this follows you. Good night.